All right, cool. Let's get started. So you probably noticed that if you go to my website for the workshop, you wouldn't be able to see like slides like the other workshops have. And that's because when I was writing this file, I realized that it would be better if I were to just actually do the examples instead of going through slides, because when we're looking at RMarkdown, it's like you're trying to output a document, and I can't really I technically for like PDF, I can put in a frame and show you what a document looks like, but it's just much easier if I just do it here. So basically today we're gonna talk about RMarkdown. And this is the file I'm opening right now. This is a markdown for this workshop. You probably have been, or hopefully have been, using RMarkdown to save your code, to save like when you do homework and stuff. Like I talked about in the first workshop. Hopefully we're doing that, so you should be at least have an idea of what RMarkdown does. Okay. So basically, in RMarkdown, it's a file type. So Markdown in itself is a file type that a lot of programming languages as compilers would have, where instead of describing code, instead of describing what a computer should do, it describes what a document should look like. So that's kind of the point of a Markdown. Usually you can see it in .md. That's what it will show if you're using it for like a general compiler. Now, for RStudio itself, somebody wrote the RMarkdown package, which basically does the same thing that a Markdown file does, but specific catered to RStudio. And one time I saw a video where the author of this package actually was talking about why he made it. And he said it was because when he was in his PhD, he wanted to be able to write his homework faster and easier than to just use LaTeX. So he developed RMarkdown to make it like simpler to do. And we'll talk about like why that makes sense and how that makes it simpler. Okay, so today we're gonna go over 4 things, and actually not in this order. We're gonna go over 4 things. We're gonna go over YAML header. We're gonna go over your R chunk. We're gonna go over your R inline code, and then we'll talk about text, which is kind of what or like the most important part of Markdown. I guess YAML is the most important part, but the text is what makes it like really cool and very flexible. Okay, so let's talk about YAML. So YAML header, it's called YAML or YAML header. It's always at the beginning of your Markdown. It's sectioned off by 3 dashes. And you can use it to specify like some general information about your file and what kind of file it should be and other secondary options. So for this Markdown, this part is my YAML header, right? It's sectioned off by the 3 dashes. And then I have my title, the author, date, output. So normally, if I were to just to write a normal HTML, I don't want to specify any sub options. So I can comment this out. And just say HTML document. It will still give me an HTML. It just doesn't really do any of the stylings that I have specified to do. So when I click knit, when I run this Markdown, it gives me this HTML file that is basically just like a website, except it's very clean. It's white. In the file i.css, I specifically changed the color of the background, so it's like so it's more eye friendly, right? It's a little yellow. It's more eye friendly. And you can see that there's no what's it called, table of contents here, because that's something you specify in the Markdown. Both for your in the YAML. Both for HTML and for PDF, you can specify TLC to be true, and then you'll get a PDF. And what do I mean PDF? Is this. Oops. So instead of HTML, I can say, I want you to generate a PDF document. Now my computer already has LaTeX engine, and we'll talk about what LaTeX engine is in a bit to help install it and stuff. And I compiled this Markdown file. What it will give me is an execution halted. Oh, it's because of the table here. I change my cable. Okay. when I run this thing, right now it's compiling. It gives me an actual PDF file. That's like a document that you can read, you can upload and stuff. So it's very flexible. You can write your homework in this, generate a report. I know people who write their thesis explicitly in R, and this is what they would use to generate a PDF file. Now, alternatively, when you start a Markdown file, when you tell R you want a new file, that's a Markdown, right? You can choose HTML, PDF. You can also choose Word. You can also choose it to presentations, which is how I've been generating the slides that I've been using for the workshop. You can even make it shiny, which is like a web app that people can interact with, right? You can use it to do interactive graphs and such, and put on your website, if you will. So that's kind of like the idea of Markdown, or sorry, the idea of YAML. You can change everything, and you specify very basic things for your file here, and that renders it specifically that way. And we'll talk about like HTML and PDF in a sec. Right now, I just want to talk about Markdown itself. Okay, so when you're in the YAML, your title will let you specify the name of your document. So like you can see that when I have my websites open, it has like a title here, and you can see it also here in the names. So that's kind of like HTML tag that you put in there in your header part. You don't really need to know HTML to know how to use Markdown, but knowing HTML would make it even more flexible for yourself. Author specifies the authors, and you'll just be able to like see who the author is, and it's kind of has like the same idea of a date, but they're in 3 different levels of header, so the size is different, right? I guess author and date is the same, but the title is a different sized header. So yeah, that's YAML. The next part of our Markdown is the code chunks. These are your code chunks. Code chunk starts with 3 of these. I actually don't know what this is called. Does anyone know what this punctuation is called? No? All right. Well, I don't know what these are called, but let's just call them ticks. So there's 3 ticks and an R. That's how you start a chunk. 3 ticks and an R, and you end your chunk with 3 ticks. That makes it a chunk. Now in your chunk, you can give your chunk a name. Like this one, I just named the chunk table. And then you can specify options for your chunk. And I'll talk about what option is in just a little bit. But basically what a chunk does is it allows you to run your R code locally, or I guess it runs it in a global environment. So we never really talked about environment, but this thing right here that you will see on your RStudio, that's your global environment. If you're running something within a function, then that's a local environment, which means everything will only be done locally. You can do things in a function that changes the global stuff, but that's generally not recommended because it can get messy real quick. But when I say this chunk can be executed locally, I mean in a document, it's like actually executed right at this spot after it read in the text. Okay, so for example, here in my chunk, I say require tidyverse, require cable extra. So it loads these 2 packages into the R session as the Markdown is being executed. Now realize every time you execute or you knit a Markdown file, you're starting a new R environment or an R session just for this file. So you always have to include loading packages into your code chunks at some point of just before you have to use the function from that package, right? So I personally do it in the beginning, but in this case, I wanted to show like this specific example, so I put it in here. So you have the packages, and I say read in this data, and I say show me the first 5 rows using the function cable LaTeX with a style, okay? And what that would output is when I run a PDF, when I knit the file, oh, this is not PDF right now. I'll just change it to HTML. When I knit the file, what happens is it actually outputs a table. So cable extra is a package written by someone that makes like really cool tables in both LaTeX and HTML. So you can actually see a well-written HTML table here using the code here. Okay, so in this case, it shows me the first 5 rows of these things. So to execute your code chunk, so like I said, like Markdown, it can output document, but it's also really convenient to just use it to store your code if you're doing like a whole series of analysis or actions. Personally, I always go for Markdown. Some people like using R Notebook. I don't really know why, but I like using R Markdown just to even store my code. That way it's like savable, you can save your code. Now, after you save your code, if you want to run just individual lines in your chunk, you use either Command Return on a Mac or Control Enter on your PC. Right, so to Command Return, so it just runs that line, and then it gives me like whatever is supposed to be the output is. Right, running a line, I read the data, just running the line, and I make it output, and you can see it show me a table. Sometimes this render gets messed up and doesn't actually show anything, even though the table is actually there, because you know it's there because when you just put it in the console, it actually tells you what the code is to make that table happen. Okay, so that's what that is. And I know Hal knows LaTeX. I don't know if other people do, but you can read this LaTeX table. If I change it from HTML to LaTeX, this is a LaTeX table. Yeah. Okay, so like you have to like kind of output it this way to show. Now, if I, instead of just running one line, I want to execute the entire chunk, you use, for Mac, you use Command-Shift-Enter. For Windows, you use Command-Shift-Return. And for Windows, you use Command-Shift-Enter, like this. See how I ran the entire chunk? And one thing I really like with it is, okay, so this is a file I've written before. Basically, it gives you this like single-player version of Battleship. The thing is, if I just comment out a line, my code is going to have an error. And instead of running a line by line, I just want to Control-Shift to run the entire code. And watch when I do this. Oh, it just went through. Well, that's embarrassing. Let's see. Let's comment out these things. Hopefully that works. Nope. What about this? Why is it running? It's not supposed to. Oh, I got it. It got stuck here. So when you run a chunk like completely, it got stuck wherever the error is, and then it shows you red to tell you that that's where the code got stuck. It didn't finish running. So then you can use this method to sort of check what's going on if you need to debug. So I personally think Markdown is really awesome for doing that. Anyways, oh, so to run your entire Markdown and not just the individual chunks, you just use this knit button, just this knit button, and it runs the document and gives you the output like that. That's what I meant when I kept saying like knit. Cool. Now, next thing is chunk options, which are these things that I wrote here. And I mean, technically, when you name a chunk, that's technically also an option. You'll separate your options by commas, so R knows how to read it properly. When you execute some R code, and this is what option does, is when you're executing some R code, you have 4 types of outputs at the very least, right? Or I guess 2 types at the very least. You can have 4 types of output. When I run this line, what happens if I just do it in a console? I see the table, but also I see what code I put in, and I see the output of the table, right? And this becomes even more obvious if I do this one. Okay, when I run a code, even though it saved things, it didn't have any output because it just saved its output was saved into an object. But I have these messages that came from the function. And sometimes you'll get warnings, like if you just load the package tidyverse, you'll always get some warnings saying some functions are masked. Those are warnings. So when you do something, you're going to have 4 types of outputs. You'll have echo, which is the code that you put in. You'll have warning, which is sometimes like something wasn't right, but it doesn't affect the output that much. They'll give you a warning. If the function is just telling you what's happening, then it gives you a message. And if it's an output that goes out right like this, then it's a result. Okay. So warning and message happen, quite a bit, and it's not necessarily that your code is wrong. Sometimes it's because the package isn't updated concurrently. Sometimes is that, when I say concurrently, I mean just like up to date. Sometimes when your package is not up to date and you load it, it'll say, "Oh, this is not made for this version of R, but you can still use it." And you're like, "Okay." Message is more harmless than warnings, and then you have results. So when you're writing a chunk, you can tell R, do you want it to show the warning in your document? Do you want it to show the messages in the document? And how do you want your results to look like? It can either be results as is or results hide. Usually you use result as is when you want want some kind of output to not have what an R output would look like. So remember that if we just do anything in R, right, it gives you the output, but it shows you in a vector way. So it tells you like this is the first element of the vector 9, so it's 9. But when you're outputting this thing, it means that it adds stuff to your output that's going to show. So, but if you just have results as is, it gives you exactly what the output is instead of things in front of the output that come out with R. And this becomes more useful when you're trying to make a table or some sort of output that's specifically styled for either HTML or PDF. Otherwise, it doesn't work well. So that's kind of what results as is does. If you don't want the results to show, you can do results equals hide. Then it will hide the result while it still does everything else. Now you can also specify your option to be echo false, which means the computer, your file would not echo your code. So when we look at this thing, right, it gave me the entire chunk, which means it's echoing the code. But if I say echo equals to false, you can see the code is gone. It doesn't show you what the code is. Now, outside of these 4 output options, there are 2 other things that is commonly used. One is eval and one is include. Eval is just whether this chunk should be evaluated, right? So if I change echo equals to false into eval equals to false, that means my echo is still by default true, but I tell R to not evaluate this chunk, just show the code, don't evaluate it. What's happening? Oof. I needed this somewhere else later. Sorry, I used this in the inline code and I forgot to run it. Oof. Okay. You know what? I'm gonna comment this line out just for the purpose of showing you this. Wait, that's not how you comment out in Markdown. Comment. I'm not trying to do data 2-3. What's happening? I'm just gonna make it. I'm gonna take it off just for this purpose. There we go. Okay. So you can see the code is still here, but it was not evaluated, and that's why there's no outputs. But once it's evaluated, it's stored in that environment, so you can call that thing out whenever you want during that markdown. And that's what I was doing here, where it gave me an error earlier and say I can't do that because there was no file. Okay, so that's eval. Include just means whether this chunk should be included. So sometimes if you're like testing multiple different things and you want to do like a version control, you can just change the include call. That way, you don't have to delete the whole thing. Okay, so that's chunk options. Outside of doing just options locally, sometimes you might want like a specific option for all of your chunks, right? Say you don't want the echo at all in the entire document. You don't want it. And what do? It's called global options. So in global options, basically you have to have a chunk, and then you have to change the options for all of your chunk within your document, which is under the knitr package. This is a package called knitr. There's a function called options, or I guess there's an object in there called options chunk, and it comes out to be probably a list. And then you have to do options, chunk, and then you select it, select the part of it that's called set, and then you can set something for the entire document, right? So if I just move this thing up top, if I put this at the very beginning and I let it evaluate just fine. So what this is supposed to do is, now I change it to false, is none of my chunks should be outputting an echo. It should not be outputting an echo. And we can see. I click on this. Wait, did I not change this? Change this. Okay. So now when I output the document, none of the code should be echoed, right? So you can see like, oh, the echo here is gone. The original code chunk there was gone. But this chunk itself is still there because I didn't do anything for this chunk. What this does is it changes everything after it, right? And then, right, you can see like all the chunks are gone. They're just not there, okay? But if I want all of the echoes to be gone, but I want one specific echo to still stay there, I can specify it just by itself, and it'll override this global environment, or I guess global option, where you'll still be able to, oh, it's because I said echo equals to false. I was like, it's supposed to show. So if I still say echo equals to true, but everything else is still false, you can see my code is still there. The echo is still there, which means you can specify things individually, even though you have a global option. And that makes your dealing with it a lot easier and faster. All right. So that's global options. It comes in handy sometimes. After we talk about chunks, we need to talk about inline R code. What's inline R code? Inline R code are things that you do, the R operations you do, instead of in a chunk, you just want the output to be exactly within your text, right? That way you get to, like, say you have a data frame somewhere else that you already use and you want to reference a specific column or a specific, cell of your data frame, then you can use this and it makes your life a lot easier, because if your data frame is changed, then the output inline would also be changed. And that's what allows you to automate a report, right? That's what I did when I wrote my Markdown for cover letter, because I just need to change like a name or the position, and then it does it automatically, right? So to write inline R code, you start your inline code with a tick and an R, a tick, R, and space, and then you end your inline with a tick, and you reference it. So for example, in this case, this is supposed to give me the data frame called data is second row, third column, that cell. It's just gonna show me what's in that thing, right? So that when I run this Markdown, when I knit it, it tells me Franklin County, Ohio, right? That's the output of that's the output of the R code data 2.3, right? If I have data, we already have data, right? Data 2.3 is Franklin County, Ohio. And when I did it in Markdown, it does it automatically. It just calls it out, right? And you can also do it you can use it to do any like R operation. So like here I say R7 plus 2, and when I run it, it just gives me the output, which is 9. Pretty plain and simple. Okay. The last thing in the Markdown is your text and sectioning. So there's 5 symbols that you want to make sure you don't misuse. You have your hashtag. Also, I saw it on TV the other day. This hashtag, its actual name is called Octothorpe for some reason. Anyways, so you have your hashtag, you have your asterisk, you have just a number, dot, you have underscore, and you have hyphens. I'll go over what they mean. So when you have a hashtag, what it does is it lets you declare a section in your document, right? So when you do so, like at the very beginning, I have one hashtag, it becomes like the main section. And then I can add more layers to that section. I can make subsections from it by using 2 hashtags, 3 hashtags, 4 hashtags, things like that. And it gives you multiple sections. It gives you multiple levels of sections. I think by default, it allows up to 7 sections. I don't know how you would use 7 levels of sections, but I guess that's possible. But when you're doing these kind of things in Markdown, you need to make sure you have a very specific format so it's not read incorrectly. For hashtag, for asterisk, and for the number dot, these have to have an empty line above it. So here I have an empty line. And then after your call, after your symbols, you need to have a space next to it, and then write whatever text you want. So this is gonna this call right here is gonna give me the subsection called text and sectioning. That's kind of what it does. That's sections, and you can see when I run it, when I knit this file, it gives me this HTML file where you can clearly see these are the level 1 sections. So RMarkdown, PDF document, HTML document, concluding remarks. These are the first level of sections. But when you click onto it, it can show you what other levels of sections you have, right? So if I add a third section, just under here, I can say, you know, third section. So what that does is it adds a third section, a third subsection into it. So when I click on text and sectioning, I see a third section that I can look at, a third level of section. And like I said, I'm pretty sure it goes up to 7 levels of section. And you can see that when I did my file, not this one, when I did this, they're not numbered, but you can change your YAML header to make the sections numbered. Then it'll have like 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and such going forward. That makes sense so far? Okay, cool. Next thing is asterisk. I use this a lot because when you have an asterisk that has an empty line before it and a space after it, this asterisk turns into a bullet point. It turns into a bullet point for you, like this. So say I have this right here, I can have an asterisk, bullet. And when I run this, what happens? When I need this document, you can see that they become bullet points instead of asterisks. Now, this is also where hyphen comes in. Hyphen lets you do like a sub list. So these, like a bullet and the number, they're called unordered list and ordered list, both in HTML and in LaTeX. So like for PDF. And you can put list under list, make it a nested list. And to nest it in RMarkdown, you will use tab. So it's like indented. And then you use a hyphen. And then this is sub bullet 1. And then it's indented, sub 2. Right, and then you can look at what came out of it. You can see this like sub bullet points that are there. So that's sort of what it does. When you have a number, it makes it an ordered list, which means your list items will be ordered, right? So if I just say 1, num1, 2, num2, 5, num5, there's a reason I wrote that. Okay. So when I output this document, you can see it says 1 num1, 2 num2, 3 num5 instead of 5 num5. Because what R does is the RMarkdown package looks at this list and says, these elements need to be in an ordered list and not based on these numbers. So what you really want is 1, 2, 3 instead of 1, 2, 5. This means the number doesn't really matter if you're making a list. You can just keep typing, and you can even switch them around because as it's rendered, it'll give you the actual order that you placed it in instead of the number you typed in. Okay. Now, asterisk is also useful in other scenarios. Both asterisk and underscore can be used to either italicize or to make something bold. So if you wrap your text with 2 bullet points, if you wrap your text with 2 asterisks, that's a weird way to say it. If you wrap your text with 1 asterisk in the front and 1 asterisk in the back, it makes the text italicized. If you wrap it with 2 bullets or 2 underscores, then you get it to be bold. You can see that as an example down here. We talked about it. Okay. So when I use like an asterisk to wrap it, you get italicized. If you use 2, you get bolded text. So that's kind of like a styling thing. Sometimes you might use it. And if you want to create a hyperlink, both in HTML and LaTeX, you would wrap it. You wrap your text with brackets, and then following it, you have a parentheses with the link you want to hyperlink it to. If you just want to include a picture, then you do the same thing, but you add a exclamation mark before it. Then R knows that this is a picture, so make it a picture. And the reason you have to specify it differently is because of the way the HTML code and LaTeX code works. So for example, when I want to do like a link for the cheat sheet, I would do bracket with the name of the cheat sheet, and then I just put a link into it wrapped by parentheses. And that comes out to be like this, which is just a hyperlink that you can click on. That's the basics of RMarkdown. All good so far? Okay, cool. I know it can sound a little boring, but it's like super useful when it comes to like note taking and stuff. This is how I took my notes when I'm on my computer. When you need to like bullet points and sectioning, it's so much easier to just use this than to type in LaTeX. I figured when I was doing it. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is PDF. How do you output a PDF? To output PDF, you need to specify your markdown to say output : space PDF document. Right? I kind of showed you an example earlier. This is how you would output a PDF document. But in addition to just having that thing, your computer also needs to know what language to use to output that PDF document. And that is why you need to have a LaTeX engine on your computer. Now, if you have used LaTeX on your computer before, and that means like not on Overleaf. Overleaf doesn't count because it uses an online engine and not your local engine. If your computer has a LaTeX engine itself, you don't have to worry about this step. If you don't have a LaTeX engine, I'm going to ask you right now to install it using this. Once it's installed, your RMarkdown can actually output PDF file. To output PDF file, you just need to you need to start your output with PDF document to look like this. Output PDF document. If you have no LaTeX experience, you don't have to worry about this. But if you need to add any packages, to your preamble in your LaTeX code, what you would do is you add a secondary option called header includes, and then you put like a hyphen, space, use package, and the package name, right? So this could be like AMS Math, BBM, AMS Simb, things like that. Hal knows what I'm talking about. So hopefully this is helpful, specifically for Hal. Okay, so that's how you do it. That's how you do PDF in Markdown. So this is especially useful when you combine it with like tables or inline code for like non-academic purposes. Like when I wrote my cover letter, I think I've showed you this before. Cover letter, right? I have this output to be PDF document. I didn't specify anything else like title, author, and stuff. I didn't do that because I wanted to do it separately. So I just didn't specify it at all. Which in LaTeX, I can say this page should be plain, and I want my LaTeX code to be specifically like that. And then, it's just stuff that you kind of use. But you can see here that I have like my inline code in my cover letter. What that allows me to do is I just have to change the values inside my chunk. This is all I need to change, and then it'll switch out all the values within my document and gives me the most updated version of my cover letter, and I don't have to worry about changing company names and stuff within the document because this does it for me. So this is kind of what it does. I can upload a trimmed version of this as a template later if you want to use this for your own cover letter. I recommend it. It makes a lot of things a lot easier. And as long as your computer can output LaTeX, you'll get a PDF right away. Anyway, so that's PDF. And then after we talk about PDF, we want to look at HTMLs. So HTMLs are like your typical websites. When you have an HTML file and you look at it, it opens in your browser and you get a website basically. So like just to make sure you guys are not like just to make sure you guys have knowledge of this, when you go to a website, what you're doing is not to look at like what's happening on the web. What it does is on the server side. So on the server side, they have these files, these HTML files, and when you link to that server, they let you look at that file. They give you a way to look at that file, and that's why it becomes a website, right? But this thing is, you can think about it as you're downloading the file from their server to your computer and look at it with the browser. And when you just exit out, then it deletes that file. You can think about it like that. And that's what these HTML files are doing. So to specify HTML, you just need to say output HTML. First, you can add sub options or secondary options after HTML. To do that, instead of having HTML document after output, you want it to be a secondary line indented. And you give it a colon. And then you go to the next line, indent it again, so it's within this HTML document call. Then you can add these secondary options or sub options into your HTML document. So for this document itself, I use table of content equals true, which means give me a table of content, but it'll just be like up there stuck. Then I say TLC float equals is true, which means this table of content should be able to float around, so move with you as you scroll through the website. I say CSS, which is like my styling sheet. It gives me my web page the styles, and theme changes like the font that I'm using and make it readable. And that gives you the website that you've been looking at for the workshop. So that's sort of like the HTML side of it. And all these like sectioning and stuff still applies. So that's how you make a website using R, or I guess RMarkdown. You can find more of the examples that I've done as projects and stuff on my website. You can look at like different parts of it. That's like pretty useful. So yeah, that's RMarkdown for your stuff. And now I'm gonna help you guys, build your own website using RMarkdown. I'm gonna stop this.